Good morning, everyone. I'm Diane Perez, and on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar entitled Customer Service Strategies for Substance Abuse Treatment, Engagement, and Retention. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration of the Florida Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and will only be able to view your name. If you have questions, please send them to the presenter and me, the host, by using the Q&A panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the Q&A panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. The presenter will address the questions as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio, there are a few options to try on screen right now, and these options will be posted in the chat panel too. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try rejoining the webinar and call in using the telephone I will call in option. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen as well to receive a certificate of attendance. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FADA website within 5 business days. To access the recording, go to www.fada.org. Also, a PDF version of this PowerPoint presentation will be emailed to participants within the same time frame. FADA produces many webinars and workshops through their support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. At the end of today's webinar, the web browser will direct everyone to an evaluation form on the FADA website. You will first need to register or sign in to your account to complete the evaluation. Information you provide FADA as part of registering remains confidential. Statements of credit will be posted within 5 business days after the evaluation closes in individual professional development journals for persons completing the evaluation and attending the full webinar. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. Do note that the evaluation will close at midnight on Thursday, February 21st. 1 to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license numbers for reporting to CE broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you don't need to provide your certification number when you register with our site. Note, please, that WebEx monitors arrival and departure of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide contact hours or a certificate of attendance if you do not attend the entire webinar. We are not permitted to provide partial credit. Now I would like to welcome Marci, who is our presenter today. Marci, a principal of the Ronik Radlauer Group. Marci Ronik has worked in health and human services for over 30 years. With expertise in conducting large-scale system and organizational assessments, the Ronik-Radlauer Group has assisted numerous individuals, organizations, and communities in the attainment of their goals.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Diane. I know pronouncing Julie's last name, Julie Radlauer, is not that easy. I hope everyone had a great weekend and very restful, and for those of you who had a longer weekend, that's even better. And I know you can't see me right now, but if you would be able to see me, you could see I have a huge smile on my face because I'm really excited to be here. And I want to thank all of you for spending your morning with me. And I'd like to thank the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, as well as the Department of Children and Families Substance Abuse and Mental Health Program Office for sponsoring this webinar. And again, thank you to Diane for the great introduction. So before we get started, I'd like to review the objectives for today's session. As you all know from the title, we'll be discussing customer engagement and retention. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about how to create a welcoming environment in your organization or program, discuss the concept of a no wrong door policy, understand the principles of ROSC, or a recovery-oriented system of care, as well as other strengths-based principles, talk a little bit about what it means to use culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate tools, discuss trauma and how it may impact an individual's experience with their treatment, and evaluate your own personal and organizational strengths and challenges in welcoming and engagement. We'll also talk a little bit about co-occurring psychiatric and substance use conditions. I know that each one of these can be a separate webinar in and of themselves, so let's get started. So I said before, Diane provided a great introduction about me. But do you really know everything there is to know about me from that brief introduction? My business partner, Julie Radlauer, and I teach a 9-month course in leadership development to emerging nonprofit leaders. It's called Learning to Lead, and our 16th cohort, hard to believe, but over 200 people have graduated, will be starting next Friday. The class consists of 20 to 25 supervisors of nonprofit organizations and programs within those organizations. Most of those individuals have never seen or met each other before. And so we start with an exercise we call Getting to Know You, getting to know almost all about you. I'm not going to sing the song for you. The first day is always exciting because when people arrive, they sit around the table, their eyes look like they're looking at deer in the headlights, and they're not wanting to engage, and they're sizing people up, just like we do in our everyday lives when we don't know people. Then we ask them to find someone that they've never seen before, sit with them, and for 5 minutes, without talking, have them judge the other person. They have to write down things like where they think the person was born, what their favorite hobby is, what they like to do on the weekends, and depending on the course we're teaching, add a question that relates to the training. For example, when we teach about co-occurring psychiatric and substance use conditions, we ask them to judge when the person last drank alcohol. It's always a very awkward 5 minutes as they're not allowed to talk, and we do enforce that rule. We walk around and make sure there's no talking. Then, after the 5 minutes are up, the room gets really, really loud. This is when they find out the reality about each other. Many people find something they have in common with the other person, like where they grew up or what they like to watch on TV. It's a great way to start off the session, and you're welcome to use this activity as well in your own program. So since we don't have enough time to do this with everyone here, and I can't see everyone, let's just try it on me. Most of you don't know me, maybe some of you do. So let's take a poll to see what you think you might know about me from that brief introduction Diane gave about me. It's multiple choice, so it narrows down the answers a bit. The questions are, where was I born? What do I like to watch on TV? And because it's a FATA presentation, the third question is, when is the last time I drank alcohol? We're going to give you about 2 minutes to complete this quick poll. Okay, Diane, I can't see the results of the poll, so I don't know if anybody didn't completed it or not.
It's coming together.
Perfect.
It's tallying right now.
Great,
So,
thank you.
do you see that now?
Nope.
Okay. Poll results. Okay. We have 75 who attended or filled the results, and I'm trying to get the status, show you what the answers are.
Or you can just tell us.
Okay, so 75 did the results. So for the first question, where was I born? 23 said Cleveland, Ohio. 14, Fort Lauderdale. 16, upstate New York. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania was 10. Rural Georgia, 3. 69, no answers. What do you like to watch on TV?
Wait. Let's just go over that one first.
Okay.
So we'll do them question by question.
Okay.
Okay. So it's funny because every time we do this question, everybody thinks I'm from the Midwest. The reality is I grew up in a very, very small town in upstate New York, a village of less than 1,000 people, give or take, who was born or died each year. My mom was the vice mayor, and she was in charge of parks and recreation and also sewers, an interesting combination. She also oversaw, She also oversaw a police department of 1.5 police officers. So Most people think, and when you say you're from New York, most people also think you're from New York City, but I did live in New York City, but I'm actually from a very, very small town in upstate New York. I'm a citified country girl. Okay, so now let's go to what do I like to watch on TV? So most people said, and again, this is what usually most people say, the Home and Garden Show, maybe because my profile picture had me out with flowers, or the Cooking Channel. And the reality is, and this is also a very big part of my identity, just like where I grew up, I used to like to watch political news shows, but it became too depressing and anxiety-provoking and draining. So now I only watch sports on TV. I don't really discriminate. My dad was a phys ed teacher, so I grew up watching sports with him. And I really don't discriminate which sports I like to watch. I am, though, particularly fond of the New York Yankees, of the Miami Heat, the New York Giants, and the Georgia Bulldogs, because that's where I got my graduate degree, my master's degree. And I'm sorry for you Gator fans, and please don't remind me of the SEC championship game this year. So let's go to the next question. So in terms of alcohol, and people never like to answer this question, so that's kind of interesting. But some people said last weekend, some people said last month, most people said I don't drink alcohol. We've had some people answer this question on the morning in the way into our training session. But actually, in terms of alcohol, most of you guessed that I don't drink alcohol. And the reality was, and we chose this because it is a FADO webinar, but the reality is it was actually last month when I was out for dinner with a friend, I had a glass of wine. Now, you asked 3 questions. You know a little bit more about me. You know what I really value as my identity in terms of where I grew up and my sports, but there's much more about me, including that Julie and I are both back in school to get our doctorates in public health at the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. So what's the point of this exercise? The point of the exercise is we don't know what we don't know until we know it. Julie and I still learn things about each other that we didn't know before, and we've been business partners for 16 years. The second point is that we're constantly judging others in the supermarket, on the highway as we're driving to see if there's somebody that's going to have road rage, or on the phone. Wherever we are in a group with other people, we're constantly judging people. But it takes a lot of time to get to know someone and understand them. And most people who do this exercise, when we ask them, say that it's more uncomfortable for them to judge the other person than it is to be judged, because they feel like they're also always being judged all the time. They don't want to get the answers wrong, especially when they're sitting and staring at another person in silence. So think about this the next time you're meeting a new client for the first time, or a new employee, or a new supervisor. If you're meeting a new client, try to think from their perspective how they feel to be asked all of these questions, sometimes over and over and over again, and then ask yourself, did you really get to know everything there was to know about that person? And especially in a first session, you know that clients are guarded and they're probably not going to tell you everything that there is to know, or not tell everything truthfully. Let's talk a little bit about customer service. So customer service is a moment of truth. It's about those first impressions that we form when we first see or meet somebody, and making decisions about those first impressions. These impressions may then impact your short or long-term satisfaction with that organization, that store, that healthcare provider, that restaurant. Think about your own doctor's or dentist's office, or a restaurant that you've recently been to. We also sometimes go into a situation with preconceived attitudes about those organizations, and a lot of times we use reviews in Yelp and TripAdvisor or feedback from friends and colleagues to make those kinds of decisions about where to go to eat and where to go for services. So before engaging and welcoming and providing good customer service, It's not only for clinicians. It also includes, think about this, who's the first point of contact when a client walks into your organization? It includes the receptionist, the maintenance staff, the food service staff, the billing staff, the security staff. We once conducted a training for non-clinical staff about co-occurring psychiatric and substance use conditions. It was a very basic training. It wasn't for clinicians. However, the staff were so appreciative for that training. First of all, they never get to go out for training and meet people from other organizations. And second, they learned so much and understood so much about the people that they serve. Now let's talk about good and poor customer service. I want you to think about where you've received good and poor customer service. Think about stores, restaurants you frequent, your doctor's or your dentist's offices, or an organization that you work with. And in the chat box, I want you to write just a word or two about a place where you received good customer service. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to write some answers. Am I able to see the results, Diane?
They're posting to the host privately, so I will move that to panelists.
Okay, or you
should start seeing
I see, yep.
a couple.
All right.
But I'll post some of the other ones to you privately.
Great. Okay, so I see some for Lowe's, I see Cheddar's Restaurant, a couple from Publix where shopping is a pleasure, and great customer service at the hotel that I stay at when traveling. So people's experience with good customer service tends to stay in our minds, and we tend to frequent those organizations or places where we're receiving good customer service. So now let's talk a little bit about and Maggiano's. I like Maggiano's too. Let's talk about poor customer service. Again, just a word or two about some place where you've received poor customer service. And again, I'll give you about 30 seconds to type it in. I am relating to your answers here. Okay, so several of you wrote Walmart, and also somebody wrote Bed Bath & Beyond. Somebody wrote bad at my nail place. Somebody wrote Sprint. I can relate to many of these, the bank and different hotel chains. And I would venture to say, well, actually, Walmart is one of my favorite ones not to like as well, partially because they opened up a big, huge superstore in that little town where I grew up and kind of put my parents out of business. They had a small mom and pop store, and they kind of put them out of business. So, as well as not being available to find anything when you try to go in there and find things. Somebody also wrote the bank, Applebee's. So if you think about places where you got poor customer service, you're probably less likely to frequent those places, or when you actually have to go to those places, think about, well, do I really want to go there because I'm expecting that I'm going to get poor customer service. So let me give you an example of poor customer service. I remember I just told you about the training that we conducted with support staff. And one person, we talked about welcoming and engagement, and one person told us a story about her waiting room. It was in the intake department for an organization that provided services to individuals who were homeless and who also had serious mental health issues. And one of the receptionists came from behind the desk with a can of Lysol and began spraying it over and near an individual who had, let's say, less than a perfect body odor. And I know it sounds alarming, or maybe it doesn't to some of you, but how do you think it made that person feel sitting in the waiting room? And how do you think it made the other people feel that were sitting with that person in the waiting room? Did they feel welcomed in that environment? That story was shocking to me, but then it actually happened to me. The same incident actually recently happened to me at my dentist's office. A woman who was apparently homeless and living with a mental health condition was trying to be seen by the dentist. She was a patient there because she was known to the dentist. One of the hygienists, and it's a very, very small dental office with a very, very small crowded and small waiting area. One of the hygienists came out into that small and crowded waiting area and also started spraying Lysol in the vicinity of the woman. In addition to that, the staff were talking about the woman in very loud voices, including the dentist, so that everyone in the waiting area could hear. I was shocked, I have to say, and I used it as an opportunity to give feedback to the staff as I checked out, because I didn't want to give it before I was going in for my cleaning. So I waited till afterwards, and I let them know that I was less than pleased with how that was handled. I reminded them that she was somebody's someone. She was somebody's mother, somebody's sister, somebody's daughter, somebody's aunt, somebody's friend. Whether it made a difference, I really don't know, but I am reconsidering where I go for dental services, even though he's a good dentist. So good customer service is about taking that extra step to help without being asked. It's about attitude and skills. And as we move through this, think about whether you provide good or poor customer service. So let's talk about attitudes. What attitudes assist in providing good service? I know most people work in the health and human services field because they get paid the big bucks. Just kidding. They work in this field because they're compassionate, caring people who really want to help others and change the world. They give fair and equal treatment to everyone who walks through their doors, and they have a basic understanding of people with complex challenges. This includes clinicians and non-clinicians, like the receptionists and the maintenance staff and the food service workers, as well as supervisors, managers, and the leadership of the organization. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of Brian Stevenson or his book, Just Mercy. He was recently on 60 Minutes with Oprah talking about a new national memorial and museum that opened in Montgomery, Alabama, acknowledging the victims of racial terror lynchings in the United States. If you have not read his book, I highly, that's a very highly recommend it. Julie and I, there's another picture of Julie and I, actually got to meet him. I actually got to meet him twice, and I have to say it was one of the highlights of my life. Brian's been working to right wrongs in the criminal justice system, and he's made this his life's passion. In addition, his TED Talk received the longest standing ovation in TED Talk history. I'll just share with you one of the stories that he talks about, but then again, I still recommend that you read his book or watch his TED Talk. But Brian was on course to become a high-paid corporate attorney. He was attending Harvard Law School, not too shabby, and he just wasn't feeling it. You know, he was going through these courses, but his passion really wasn't there. And I'll talk about passion in a little bit. But he had lost his passion. And so he decided to take an internship working with people. And he remembered, you know, his grandmother. His grandmother raised him in also a very small town. And she used to hug him so tight, so that when he finally broke free of her hugs, she said, "Can you still feel me?" And he said, "Yes, Mom, I could still feel you." And so she said, "Good. Then I know you know that you feel my love." So he takes this internship down in Georgia, and he doesn't know anything about the death penalty. He doesn't know anything really about the law. He's not a lawyer yet. But his first assignment is to drive out to rural Georgia and to a prison and tell this man who's on death row that he's not going to be killed that year. And so he drives the 2 hours outside into rural Georgia. He drives to this prison. He goes through all the security checks that you have to go through. And he meets with this client, and he sits across from him, and he said, "I don't know anything about the law. I don't know anything about the death penalty. I'm not a lawyer, but they sent me here to tell you that you're not going to die this year." And the man looks at him and he said, "Say that again." He said, "I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about the law. I don't know anything about the death penalty, but you're not going to die this year." And the man said, "Say that again." He said, "I'm not a lawyer." He said, No. Say the last part. You're not going to die this year." Say it again. "You're not going to die this year." Again. And he made him say it 10 times. And then finally, the man put his hands on top of Brian's hands and he said, "Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are the first person who has come here to tell me that I'm not going to die anytime soon. I have not allowed my wife or my children to come visit me because I didn't know if I was going to die the next day. You've just given me hope so that I can reunite with my wife and my children and spend time with them before I die." It was a very, very powerful story. It's something that has stuck with me forever. And that's what Brian's passion is and what he's done. So he talks about 4 key principles that I think are just so important when we're working with individuals with complex needs, or really anybody for that matter. So the first thing is you have to get proximate. That means learning about other people, like you learned a little bit more about me. We already discussed this when you were doing the getting to know exercise. But remember, we don't know what we don't know until we know it. So we have to ask those questions. The second thing we have to do is help change the narrative. Most of our clients are coming to us with histories of trauma, which we're going to discuss shortly. They've been through multiple systems, multiple times, and the first question they're typically asked is, "Why are you here?" or "What brought you here?" And then they have to tell their story about their complex condition, probably over and over and over again, to people that they've never met before. Instead, we need to be establishing rapport with our clients first, then get to know them, then help them change those challenges and barriers into strengths and opportunities. I once conducted a focus group with several individuals who were attending a drop-in center at a behavioral health organization. They were individuals who had been diagnosed with co-occurring conditions. And through our conversation, I learned many, many things. But the one thing that stands out to me is this question. They asked, "Why doesn't anybody ask what's gone right in my life? Why doesn't anybody ask when I was clean and sober for a period of time, what helped me? And then help me engage in those activities that helped me. Why doesn't anybody ask when I was not in the hospital and I was living in the community, what supports did I have that helped me stay out of the hospital and stay in the community?" We're used to identifying problems. We use them on treatment plans because we have to fix something. We need to help our clients change their narrative. The third thing is we have to provide hope. Remember, our clients are coming from complex places. They've been involved in multiple systems, possibly homeless, possibly previously incarcerated, possibly estranged from their family. And we need to be able to provide them with that one kernel of hope that may help them improve their lives. Remember, they're coming to you at a moment of despair and desperation, whether it's for detox, for crisis counseling, for residential, or for outpatient treatment. Does anybody really want to be there? But they're there and they're talking to you. So use that as an opportunity to engage, connect, and offer hope for a better future. Finally, we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. This is something that many of us do on a daily basis without really thinking about it. However, some of us didn't know what we were signing up for when we took this job or position. We didn't know what in the field meant or in-home services really meant until we were in the field or doing in-home visits. And so think about that if you're a supervisor and you're interviewing people, that you really need to set that up as an expectation so that people understand what it means to be in the field or doing in-home services. So I don't know about you, but Diane, when she gave that introduction about me, said that I've been in this field for over 30 years. I know, I don't look that old, but I learned how to do this work literally with on-the-job training and feet to the fire. I learned how to work with individuals with co-occurring conditions before they were called co-occurring conditions. I trained with a woman named Kathleen Shiaka in New York. I don't know if any of you have heard of her. When we use the terms MICA, mentally ill chemical abuser, or CAMI, chemically abusing mentally ill person. What terrible, terrible labels there were back then. But I learned how to ask questions in a respectful manner, engage and establish rapport, and get my clients to tell me things that they never divulged to anyone else, because I didn't start out with, why are you here? What brought you here? What's your problem? Most of these individuals were coming from inpatient psychiatric units into the community. Now, this was in New York City in the 1980s, during the time of deinstitutionalization and the use of psychotropic medications. The discharge planners who had to fill out the paperwork would write on the records, this was before electronic health records, about substance or alcohol abuse. Remember, they were coming from a psychiatric unit. So back then, and even still sometimes now, people that ran psychiatric or mental health organizations didn't want to take individuals with substance use conditions and vice versa. So the discharge planners would write on the record about substance use, client denies, client denies, client denies. So we would accept them, they would get discharged, and we would do what was the first thing that they would do, the clients would do. First thing, stop taking their meds. Second thing, start using drugs or alcohol. And crack cocaine was the drug of choice for my clients back in the day. And the third thing that would happen, wind up back up in the hospital or the streets or jail or worse. So I learned how to ask questions, and I learned all I could about co-occurring conditions, and I learned mostly from the people that we served by getting proximate, changing the narrative, offering hope, and being comfortable being uncomfortable. I hope that helped you. Okay. So now when we're thinking about our customers and their needs, we also need to think not just of our clients, but all of our customers. These may include vendors, other staff members, community stakeholders, judges, police officers, child welfare advocates, and other providers. And I would also say that they need to consider your needs as well. As Diane said, you'll receive a PDF of this PowerPoint, and I encourage all of you to identify the people that you interact with on a daily basis and consider what their needs are. And maybe you can also ask them what they need from you. Let's talk a little bit about recovery-oriented system of care, or ROSC. I'm not going to go into great detail about ROSC because there are training workshops in the community that are full-day sessions, and I encourage all of you to attend one of them in your community when they come around. I had the pleasure of meeting Bill White, whose website's also included in the resources. While he talks mostly about substance use disorders, this quote can apply to individuals with complex needs such as co-occurring conditions, including physical and medical conditions, as well as individuals involved in multiple systems and organizations. We need to integrate across systems and meet people where they are. More about that in a minute. So just as traditional systems were siloed, as I talked about a little bit earlier, mental health treats mental health, substance use treats substance use, and many still are, as is funding for the most part. The traditional system focused primarily on reducing symptoms through medication or treatment, like I said, discharging people with meds, and stabilization. Typically, in a traditional system, other life domains such as finances, housing, natural supports, education, all those social determinants of health that are just so important to the people that we serve, were not addressed. In a recovery-oriented system of care, the symptom reduction has a purpose. It has a means to an end. And we have to ask the person, what do they want and need, and how can we help them achieve that? Additionally, Ross considers other domains as a priority. We're not going to take care of our substance use or mental health conditions if we don't have a safe place to live. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We don't work in a vacuum. We have to consider the individual's employment, their housing, recreation, physical, social, and spiritual needs, and more. If we're effective, we're asking about their satisfaction in those areas as well as their motivation to change. If they're not satisfied and they are motivated to change, chances are they will. If they're not satisfied and they're not motivated, chances are they won't. It's our job to understand the why behind the satisfaction or dissatisfaction and the desire to change or lack thereof. Again, if you've not taken a class in motivational interviewing, I highly recommend you do so. I'm going to be recommending a lot of other training. These are the elements of a recovery-oriented system of care, and I'm not going to go over all of them in detail. However, you can see that it promotes integration. It involves family members or other natural supports. It utilizes peer support, which is extremely important in our work. I can't emphasize that enough. It values partnerships with others and transparency. Remember, I talked about the discharge planners who wrote client denies, client denies. That was not transparent. And it provides individualized, person-focused treatment. The person is in the middle. Just as there are many ways to have a baby, think about that for a second, there are multiple paths to recovery. It promotes ongoing support, not just a one-and-done session, and it uses information provided by individuals and their families. Again, it promotes hope, which I talked about earlier, which we've discussed, and it is strengths-based. So how do we engage our clients? I want you to think about this. If you're clinicians, if you're doing intakes, I want you to think about your policies and procedures. I want you to think about your forms, the forms that you use. How do we engage our clients? Are our screening and assessment instruments and policies and procedures client-friendly? Have we asked our clients what they think about our policies and procedures and instruments that we use? Are we integrating across systems for co-occurring conditions? Do we collaborate in the community? Are we identifying risk factors as well as protective factors? Are we using motivational interviewing? And are we assessing across domains such as abuse and neglect? These are all tools in your toolbox that you can use. And we'll talk about trauma in a few minutes. As we begin to engage our clients, whether we're support staff or clinicians, these are the goals of initial engagement. Think about how you greet individuals who are coming to your organization. Do you stand up to greet them? Do you look them in the eye? And I know, again, cultural competence, we're not going to talk in detail about cultural competence today, and different cultures have different ways of addressing people, but we need to understand where they're coming from. Think about what their first impression might be of you, just as you did with me, and what your first impression might be of them. Engaging individuals and families, if you're lucky enough to have families who are involved in treatment, it's an art. It's not a science. There's no manual that teaches us how to engage people, even though I'm telling you that there are different tools in the toolbox. Each family and individual is unique and they have unique needs. And we need to ensure that everyone who's participating understands what's being said, whether that's from a literacy level, a linguistic level, or a developmental age level based on their age. We have to be careful of the use of words and jargon that other people may not understand. We are notorious in this field for using acronyms. I've already used one, the ROS. We've already, FADA has an acronym. There's a lot, DCF is an acronym. We use a lot of acronyms that people may not understand. Remember that everyone has strengths. And if you're fortunate, like I said, to have family members engaged in the treatment process, you're really lucky. They should be valued as a resource. Again, they're coming to you because they've tried other avenues, or this may be their first interaction with the behavioral health system, and we want to make that a positive experience for them. They're doing the best they can with the resources that they have. We need to accept them where they are, and we also need to balance that with the need to make changes. That's why they came to you in the first place. So here are some basic engagement strategies. I'm going to be talking about active listening after the break, but let's talk about some of the characteristics of good engagement strategies. We have to show that we're genuinely interested in what people have to say. Clients can see right through you if you're not really interested in what they're telling you. We have to demonstrate respect and empathy. Even though you may never have been in their shoes, you can still demonstrate respect and empathy, and this allows you to establish rapport and trust with them. You can really get to know them by getting proximate. You can understand and support their future dreams and their passions, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and provide education as well as support. I'm going to talk about actually their passions and dreams now. So Julie and I conducted the leadership class that we teach. We also taught it for individuals served at our local mental health association in Broward County. One group consisted of 6 individuals who were older adults who had lived with serious mental illnesses, some also with substance use conditions, all of their adult lives. We did an exercise with them where we asked them what they were passionate about. Not one of them could answer us. We then asked them to think about back to their childhood and the activities that they remembered most fondly that they engaged in. We gave them a week to think about it, and when they came back, one woman said she remembered the aromas of gardening with her grandmother. One said she loved photography and taking pictures, and a third said she loved reading books and the feel of holding books in her hand. At the conclusion of the curriculum, the woman who loved gardening started her own herb garden. The one who loved photography was taking her pictures and making them into a photo album for her grandchildren as a legacy project. And the third woman who loved books got a volunteer position on the bookmobile. This was pretty powerful stuff for people who couldn't identify their passions when first asked. This is important for us to think about when we're talking to our clients about natural supports and what they like to engage in and how we can help them engage in those activities. Just like those people said at the drop-in center that I worked with about why doesn't anybody else ask me about what helped me when I was living in the community and I was substance free. So to go from that, we're going to talk a little bit and switch gears about trauma. And then we're going to take a quick break. But we're going to talk about trauma and how it affects the people that we serve. All of us have experienced a crisis in our lives. The death of a loved one, a medical diagnosis, a breakup, or a financial crisis, to name a few. Trauma is that and more. It can include being in a car accident, being hospitalized or Baker-acted, being in a natural disaster, being a victim or witnessing domestic violence, and experiencing emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. I'm not going to go into detail here about trauma-informed care, and another recommendation that I'm going to make for training is that you all attend a training specific to this issue. Now, you have several trainings to sign up for. But what we need to recognize is that trauma is the experience of violence or victimization and can include many events. It's important to remember that it's the individual's experience of the event, not necessarily the event that's traumatizing. I'm going to say that again. It's the individual's experience of that event, not necessarily the event itself that's traumatizing. For them, it's what was going on at the time, who was there, the smells and sounds associated with that event. Those things are so important, especially when we're talking about creating a welcoming environment in our waiting areas. Again, here are some examples of exposure to trauma. It's how we experience that trauma and how we are able to build recovery and resiliency skills later on in life that matters the most. So I want to do an exercise, and I'm not going to ask you to put it in the chat area, but I'm just going to ask you to do something for me. I want you to think about the biggest crisis in your life. I'm going to give you a moment to think about the biggest crisis in your life. Some of you may have more than one, but think of one. Okay, everybody should have thought about the biggest crisis in their life and have that in their mind. Now, I want you to answer the question, how many of you got through that biggest crisis in your life with the help of your family? Okay. How many of you got through that biggest crisis in your life with the help of your friends? Okay. And how many of you got through the biggest crisis in your life with the help of your faith? However you define your faith. Okay. Now, finally, how many of you got through that biggest crisis in your life with the help of a paid professional? All right, now I can't see you and I don't know what your answers are, but I would venture to guess, because Julie and I have done this exercise hundreds of times and it's always the same way. We have people close their eyes when they do it in a live session, but the majority of you probably got through that biggest crisis in your life through the help of your family, faith, and friends. And very few of you got through that biggest crisis of your life with the help of a paid professional. So, if we as paid professionals get through the biggest crisis of our lives with the help of our family, faith, and friends, why aren't we also talking about that with the clients that we're serving and engaging them in figuring out how they can also use their natural supports of their family, faith, and friends and other activities? Just think about that for a minute. So I live 2 minutes away from Douglas High School in Parkland. My daughters both graduated from there. The youngest graduated in 2017, the year before the incident. And we lost a family, friend, and neighbor in the event. Behavioral health professionals here have been providing amazing support and help to victims and family members, as well as community support since the event. Last Thursday, February 14th, was a very, very difficult day for all of us who relived that moment. I will never forget where I was, who I was with, texting my daughters, driving home and not being able to get home, helicopters flying overhead for days, reporters staked out, and getting the awful news that our family friend and neighbor, Jamie, was gone. For me, last Thursday, I chose not to be on social media. That was my choice. Others chose to engage in community activities and service projects. Others got involved in social and political action. My younger daughter came home to spend the day with me. My older daughter wrote an incredible Facebook post that I saw the next day that may be picked up by a magazine. We all grieve and recover in our own unique ways. So instead of asking, what's wrong with you, the paradigm shift has to be, what has happened to you? That one shift in asking an important question can open up a whole other avenue of questions and answers. Again, this can open up Pandora's box, which is why I highly recommend that everyone in our field attend a trauma-informed or trauma-focused training, including how to create a trauma-informed environment. This includes support staff as well as clinicians. For clinicians, I recommend a deeper dive into trauma-informed treatment, such as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, EFT, emotional freedom techniques or tapping, and ART, accelerated resolution therapy, which was developed at the University of South Florida by Dr. Kevin Kipp. People can experience the same event, and some develop signs and symptoms of traumatic stress, while others will not. One way to understand this is to think about protective factors in our lives, or those characteristics or circumstances that can insulate us from the impact of trauma. We can think of these as protective factors or recovery and resiliency skills. So what are some of these protective factors? The first is resilience, the ability to bounce back after a traumatic event, engaging in activities with others and not isolating ourselves. They include social connectedness, having a great support system of family, faith, and friends, as we just discussed. Identifying those individuals who you can rely on in times of need. I call them my tribe or my top 5. I've also heard them referred to as a magic circle. They're the people who are there for you no matter what, without judgment. Again, think about when you're interviewing your clients and you're meeting them and you're engaging them, who's in their top 5? Who do they go to? It also includes the ability of the individual to form attachments with others, to allow themselves to be nurtured, and to be emotionally aware themselves. Some individuals affected by the Douglas incident will recover even though they experienced the event firsthand. Others, including some kids that I know, will be triggered by a fire alarm, by smells, and by dates. Recognizing that an individual has experienced trauma in their lives and helping them identify those protective factors is what's important in engaging our clients. One thing that Douglas actually did after the event was they changed the sound of the fire alarm so that it wouldn't trigger them to hear that same fire alarm sound. Okay, so ending on that note, before we take a quick break, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about no wrong door, we're going to talk about communication, active listening, and then a little bit more about co-occurring conditions.
Thank you, Marci. We will convene and come back in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's webinar. Marci, Ronik, if you're ready, I'll turn the presentation back over to you.
I'm ready, if everybody else is. Okay. So now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about no wrong door. And the concept of no wrong door is so important in our field that DCF actually required of organizations to develop no wrong door access policies. I talked about this briefly when I discussed the siloed mental health and substance use organizations and the funding streams. But no wrong door means being able to access and be provided with services or referrals to services wherever an individual shows up. So let's talk about a fictional client. We'll call her Charlene. Charlene was brought to the domestic violence shelter because her boyfriend beat her up in a bar and the police brought her there. Charlene was raised in the foster care system, bouncing from foster home to foster home. She was sexually abused by an uncle when she was little, and her parents were both using drugs and alcohol. When she was 16, she ran away from her foster home, and she was human trafficked by her now boyfriend. I use that word boyfriend in quotes. She became pregnant at 16 and again at 18, and both of her children, to no surprise, are now in the foster care system. When Charlene was brought to the domestic violence shelter, they decided she needed to be detoxed, so they sent her to the local detox center. When she arrived at the detox center, they identified that she had a psychiatric condition, and they sent her to the local mental health center to get stabilized on medications. Of course, there was a 2-week wait for time for that, and I'm using that as a generous number. So where do you think Charlene wound up? Back at the bar with her boyfriend. When was the ideal time to intervene? At the domestic violence shelter. I'm not saying that everybody in that domestic violence shelter has to be an expert on co-occurring conditions. What I'm saying is they have to have a basic understanding of co-occurring conditions, and more importantly, cross-sector and cross-system collaboration so that they know who they can call and how to refer people and how to follow up on those referrals. We need to engage our system partners and help people at the time. That's the time to engage them. It's at that time when they come to us for help. Referring them elsewhere, not following up, or telling them to come back in 2 weeks, we're going to lose them. So we have to do the best that we can when they show up because that's when they're ready. So let's just talk a little bit more about co-occurring conditions. And we're going to do another poll. It's actually a little bit of a quiz to see how much you know about co-occurring conditions. So Diane, if you can bring that one up. Oh, there you go. And we're going to give you 3 minutes to complete these questions. Okay, time's up. Let's see how we did. Okay, so first question. Dr. Minkoff, and I don't know how many of you have been trained by Dr. Minkoff, know Dr. Minkoff, Ken Minkoff. I call it getting Minkoffed. I'll talk about him a little bit more at the end, but I was also trained and am a friend of Dr. Minkoff and learned so much, incredibly so much from him. But the correct answer, which most of you got, is that the occurrence of co-occurring conditions is an expectation, not an exception. We should expect that when people are coming to us for substance use treatment, that they may also have an underlying mental health condition. Or if they're coming to us for a mental health condition, we may also consider the expectation that they are using substances at the same time. So compared to adolescents with substance use conditions, and I love using all of the above answers because people always put all of the above, and that's correct. But adolescents with substance use conditions or mental health conditions only, those with co-occurring, have an earlier onset of substance use, meaning that they're using in middle school, sometimes earlier, use substances more frequently, they use substances over a longer period of time, and they have greater rates of family, school, and legal problems. So they've been in jail, they've been hospitalized, they have many other issues. So that's good for you guys, got most of them right. When individuals use substances to help them cope with their mental health problems, it is referred to as, and again, you guys are very smart, self-medication, which I'm sure all of you know that anyway. So that was kind of like a gimme question. Which of the following represent client-family barriers to integrated treatment for co-occurring conditions? Again, all of the above, which includes lack of education. They don't know. We've actually worked with parents who have children who have co-occurring conditions. And when you talk with them, they have mental health conditions. When you talk with them, they say, I'd rather my child have a substance use condition because they think it's easier to get cured than a mental health condition. And most of their kids have co-occurring conditions. So there's also denial and minimization, which we know, which is why it's so important to get to know people. There's mistrust of the system because their first encounter or their multiple encounters was not positive. And there may be co-occurring conditions within the family. So if you think about Charlene and what was going on in her family dynamic, her parents were both using drugs and alcohol, and both of her parents might also have suffered from anxiety or depression or some other mental health concern. So we also have to think about when we're treating individuals, we have to think about the dynamics in those families and what may be going on, and if there are other co-occurring conditions within those families. And then again, all of the above, and this is what Dr. Minkoff says, the following, according to him, are important for treatment success: empathy, hope for a happy life, strengths-based learning, skills and supports, all of the above. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. But according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or more widely known as SAMHSA, over 8.9 million people in our country have a co-occurring condition. And so we need to consider that when people come to us for treatment. Are we assessing them for co-occurring conditions? Are we screening them for co-occurring conditions? Is one more interactional than the other? Can we identify when folks are stabilized for their mental health issues and not for their substance use conditions, or vice versa? We teach a full day class in co-occurring conditions, and again, I recommend that everybody attend a class in co-occurring conditions if you have not already. So now I'm going to go over how to identify a welcoming environment. And we'll be sending you a Word document that has an organizational culture walk that you can actually do within your own organization. We use this in our leadership class, and it's very, very eye-opening to folks when they go out back to their organization, and then they come back and they say, oh, I realized a few things that I didn't realize were going on. So I want you, to, when you get this document, to go back. You could do it with colleagues, but go back and look at your organization, your program, your facility through the eyes of somebody who's coming there for services, kind of like a secret shopper. I actually did this once for an organization that I worked for, and yes, it was very, very eye-opening after I sat in the waiting room literally for 8 hours. I actually went to a meeting and told them I'd be back. So what are the first things you notice? Are there enough parking spaces? Are there assigned spots for quote-unquote important people? Who are they for? Were you able to find the building? Was there signage in and around the office? When you walked into the organization, were you welcomed? Were you greeted, like we talked about before? How did that happen? Are people asked when we give them paperwork, are they asked if they need assistance with the completion of that paperwork? Are they told if they're going to have to wait, unlike what I had to do? Were they told how long that wait time is going to be, or may be, so that at least they know what to expect and we're being transparent with them? Are there reading materials in the waiting area? Are they current, not from like 3 years ago? And are they relevant to the people that you're welcoming? Are they culturally relevant? Are they developmentally relevant? Look at the objects and the artifacts that sit on desks and walls. What's posted on the bulletin boards or displayed on walls? What types of pictures and artwork are on the walls? What's displayed on desks or in other areas of the building? And then observe common areas and furniture arrangements. Are the colors warm and inviting and soothing? Are the lights warm, or are they those fluorescent lights that are really harsh? Who sits in what offices? How much space is given to whom? Where are the offices located? Where are people located? And this one is really important. Are people having conversations in hallways about clients or other coworkers? We do a lot of consulting work with organizations, and it amazes me how much I hear about what's going on in the organization by the people that are talking in hallways. And of course, I have to provide them with that feedback. How do people dress, and how are common areas utilized? What's your organization done to make people feel welcomed? And how could you feel more at ease if you're a client that's coming there for services? Julie and I recently conducted 2 organizational assessments for CARF accreditation at veterans clinics. And, you know, if you work with veterans, you know that they have a lot of trauma in their lives. And one of them was in Maryland, is in Maryland. The other one is in Denver, Colorado. Both of these organizations had such welcoming environments. Not only were we greeted right away and warmly by the receptionist, okay, they knew we were coming, but still, but the waiting areas were so peaceful and calming and soothing. They had separate areas for young children, teens and young adults, and adults. And Julie and I both remarked that we wanted to actually move in to some of those rooms because it was a perfect example of a welcoming environment. So now let's shift a little bit and talk about communication. And the importance of this definition of communication is that it's about information being exchanged, which is what communication is about, but the goal is achieving mutual understanding. That means that we have to make sure that both parties, the one who's sending the message, the one who's receiving the message, both understand the information that's being exchanged. So there's one simple rule in communication. The meaning of the message resides in the receiver of the message, the person that's hearing the message. Taking courses or attending seminars on communication are not going to make a difference if the most basic issue in communication is not recognized. All understanding of information is based on the internal processes of the receiver of the message, not with the person who's sending the message. And it's very, very important. We have to understand the perception of the person. We have to ask reframing questions. We have to make sure that they understood what we said. I can't emphasize this enough. It's extremely important. So effective communication begins with getting the listener's attention through strong visual, nonverbal elements, and then uses powerful vocal and verbal elements to transmit the message. I don't know if you remember, but when I first opened this webinar, I told you that I was smiling and my hands were open. And I told you I was really excited to be here, and I was so happy that you joined me this morning for the webinar. And if you could see me, you could see that I was genuinely happy to be here. If I had been looking down at the ground and not smiling and said the same thing, I'm so happy to be here, I'm glad you joined me, you would not have believed me if you had seen me. So the listener receives the message through a series of filters: their past experience, their perception of the speaker, what they think of what that speaker looks like, their emotional involvement with the message, how emotionally connected they are, their understanding of the verbal content, again, if we're using jargon or words that they may not understand, their level of attention, they may be distracted, and so on. In a sense, people translate the message into their own words, creating their own version of what they think the speaker was saying. So what people hear is 40% of the message. The words are only 10% of the message, and 50% is the visual, what they see or feel. This is why it's so important. Like I said, I was smiling, my arms were open. It's really, really important to make sure that your visual cues are showing up. So think about it. If you're sitting in a meeting or a training and there's someone talking and their arms are crossed in front of them, what kind of body language are they conveying? They may be saying kind or benevolent things, but the message that they're conveying is that they don't really want to be there. How about using your voice in different situations? Do you raise your voice when you're angry or upset? Generally, when we raise our voice when we're angry or upset, guess what? The other person raises their voice and makes it louder, and it becomes much, much louder. Do you speak faster when you're nervous? A lot of people do that. Do you have a cheerful voice or a tone that's warm and understanding? Do you sometimes come across as bossy or weak or unsure? Do you speak in a formal voice or in a very trendy manner, using words like or you know? Think about how you might modify your voice in certain situations. It's not easy work, but it is important work. And again, training in communication skills is also extremely important. It's a part of what we teach during leadership. We spend the whole day on that. There are many physical and psychological barriers that may exist when you're communicating with others. There's cultural, background, bias, and different biases. We allow our past experiences to change the meaning of the message. This is why it's so important to recognize other people's cultures and backgrounds and determine how they like to be communicated with. Again, cultural competence is a journey. It's not a destination. We'll never understand everything there is to know about every single person's culture when they walk in to see us. And they're also unique individuals. So in addition to their cultural background, they're also bringing their other unique issues. We also talk about the culture of incarceration, the culture of homelessness, the culture of hospitalization. People that have been exposed to those kinds of environments also have been exposed to different cultures. There may be noise or environmental noise or the equipment that can impede clear communication. When we first started the leadership training, we do it the first Friday of every month, and we were doing it at a local organization, and for some reason, they were mowing the lawn outside that organization the first Friday of every month, and they were using the leaf blower. So I don't know if you guys hear leaf blowers, but they're very, very, very loud. And so that interfered with our ability to train effectively, and it was very, very distracting. We can also be focusing on ourselves rather than the other person, and this can lead to confusion and conflict. In this case, we're thinking about what we're going to say next instead of what the other person is saying. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about active listening. Perception, if we feel like the person's talking too fast, if they're not speaking fluently, if we don't understand their language, if they're not articulating clearly, we may dismiss that person and not think about what they're saying. Also, our preconceived attitudes about that person also affect our ability to listen. And then there are also environmental factors that may cause a distraction, such as bright lights and, as I said before, people talking in hallways. These are just some barriers. I'm sure you can think of many others. The important point here is to try to remove as many barriers as possible in order to communicate effectively. Let's talk a little bit about how we greet our customers and how we can greet them in a welcoming way. We talked about creating a welcoming environment, which you're all going to go back and evaluate your environment, and greeting people as soon as they appear, even if they're busy. Have you ever gone to a doctor's office up to the window and the receptionist doesn't even look up to acknowledge you? They just ask you to sign the sign-in sheet? Excuse me. Not very effective. We want to make eye contact with the person. Again, we may need to consider cultural differences. Hang on, I'm just going to get a drink. Talking a long time. Introduce yourself. Ask them how you can help. Give them your full attention. Be polite and courteous. And most importantly, smile. A smile goes a long way. A segment of the class we teach in leadership is positive psychology. And just very quickly, 50% of your happiness genes you're actually born with. So you're predisposed to either being happy or not being happy. And 10% of your happiness is based on your conditions, where you live, what job you have, your employment status, your marital status, your parenting status, all of those kinds of things, which means that 40% of your happiness you can actually control. So you can smile more often, you can journal, you can meditate, you can exercise, you can do so many things to increase your happiness levels. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stereotypes because we all have them and we all have biases based on where we were raised, what we learned as we were becoming young adults, and where we live. So I'm going to ask you now to comment in the comment box a couple of, in the chat box, I should say, like we did before with good and poor customer service. I want you to comment in the chat box a couple of stereotypes that you may have heard or know about young black men. I'm going to give you a minute to do this. Keep going. You can brainstorm. Doesn't have to be what you think, what you've heard, what other people have said. Okay, 10 more seconds. Okay. I don't know, Diane, if people are still writing, we can wait a minute. No, people are still writing. Great. Okay. Now I want you to do it for veterans. I want you to write down stereotypes that you may have heard or you know or you grew up with or you've heard people say about veterans. All right, 10 more seconds. Okay, great. Okay, finally, one more. One more. I want you now to do the same exercise for people who are living with cancer. About a minute to do that. Okay. Diane, can they see the responses in the chat box?
They cannot.
Okay, all right. Perfect. So I'm going to go back up and I'm going to read some of these responses to you. Let's see. So, in terms of young black men, they're violent, they're bad and dangerous, they're angry, hostile, a thug, uneducated, and dumb. They have hatred for law enforcement. They're in gangs, dangerous, on drugs. They're in a gang. They're not working. They're disrespectful. They're all involved with gangs or other negative legal problems, also DWB or driving while black. They're lazy, jailbirds, will rob you, aren't educated, carry guns, have babies out of wedlock, oh my goodness, or all well endowed, don't like black women. They're violent and surly. They're negative communications and saggy, low-hanging pants. They're hoodlums. I like this one, says, do all these things to find out who they really are. And they only live into their early 20s. So that's for young black men. Now let's talk about veterans. PTSD, they're heroes. This is another one about young black men, I think. Don't have a father in their life, play sports, don't want to attend school or higher education. Veterans, they're drug addicts, they're poor, dirty, they have mental health issues, PTSD, PTSD, PTSD. They're crazy. Combat vets are all messed up. They're alone, depressed, and lazy. Suffer from PTSD. They get no income from the government. They're always panhandling. They're addicts who don't want help from the system, just free services and free housing. The co-workers have said that veterans we've served were all arrogant, but I try to tell them the sort of confidence is ingrained in them during basic training or boot camp. PTSD, difficulty finding employment, proud of their service except for Vietnam vets. They live off the government, proud of their service to our country. War vets, I don't know how they live with that horrific trauma. And now for individuals living with cancer, sad, depressed, weak, depressed and angry. They're suffering. They're sad, brave, courageous, fighters and heroes. Oh my God, you poor thing. They tend to want to fight to survive. They lose all their hair. They're strong mentally, survivors, and have good family support. They'd rather die than do any more treatment. They're isolated and depressed, difficulty keeping employed. They're all depressed if they're not in denial. They're allowed to be depressed even if they're not actually depressed, and may have had a healthy acceptance rather than being in denial. And somebody also said it's caused by smoking. Okay. So note that I didn't say negative or positive stereotypes when I gave you the instructions for this exercise. Yet most of the ones for young Black men and veterans are negative, while some of the ones for people living with cancer are positive. Now, it's not that we shouldn't have biases or stereotypes. We need them as filters. However, we need to remember that everyone's unique. It's interesting, we do this exercise when we teach cultural competence, and also, so what we do is we put up paper around the room, and we'll come up with different categories depending on who the group is that we're training. So we typically always put young Black men, but we'll also put up single mothers, we'll put up Republicans, we'll put up white CEOs, we'll put up just all people who are homeless, people living with diabetes, all kinds of different things. And then we have people go around and actually brainstorm using markers, and they actually write these things that you just wrote on those papers. And then we have people who relate to or associate with those categories of people, stand next to them and read them out loud. And again, like I said, most of them are negative, even though we didn't say negative or positive stereotypes. And then we ask the question, do all young Black men fit those stereotypes? I'm sure some of you in this webinar have raised young Black men, and you would not agree with those stereotypes. I'm sure some of you know or live with or are, in fact, veterans, and also don't display all of those stereotypes. And the same thing with people with cancer. So the most important thing that we have to remember is that, yes, even though we have biases, because we need them as filters in our lives, we also need to recognize that everybody's an individual and everybody is unique. So just as an example, my brother my younger brother, he's 3 years younger than me, has diabetes. And he got it when he was in college, and he knows that, you know, if he checks his insulin, he has an insulin pump actually, if he watches what he eats, if he doesn't drink alcohol, if he takes care of himself physically, he knows that his diabetes is going to be in check. He also knows that if he doesn't do those things, then his diabetes is out of whack. Now, if you say to my brother, oh, you're diabetic, you know what he's going to say to you? Well, I'm a person who has diabetes. I'm also a father, a son, a brother, a nephew, a husband, an ex-husband, an employee, a supervisor, a sports fan. He's going to describe to you everything that he is in addition to having diabetes. So the diabetes doesn't define him. It's just a part of who he is. And that's what I want you to remember and take away. Having a substance use condition, a mental health condition, a co-occurring condition is just a part of who people are. It's not the whole of who people are. I hope that was helpful. And then actually, when people stand next to the papers and that they identify with, we let them take the papers off the wall and rip them into shreds so that we get rid of those stereotypes. One person actually wanted to burn it, but that was not safe, so we didn't allow that. Okay. Are we showing this, Diane?
We can.
Okay. So here's just a quick little video. You're going to do this?
I am. Give me a second, and I'll have it up. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Diane, for showing that. That's a YouTube video that you can look at on YouTube. But it's a quick video, but I hope you get that it just shows how we go in with preconceived notions. And, you know, when it started out, they were smiling at each other. You're thinking, oh, maybe they're going to go on a date or something. And then it went downhill from there. And it also showed us that that young woman gave that young man a dose of his own behavior. So good for her. So again, think about how you like to be engaged and how you like rapport to be built with you. What does it feel like? Do you feel comfortable when you go to your doctor's office? Do you feel important and valued? Think about this in your supervisory situations. On a side note, most people don't leave their organizations because of the salary, believe it or not. They leave because of their relationship with their supervisor or lack thereof. So think about this when you're also trying to build rapport with your staff, your supervisor, or other colleagues. So I can't overemphasize the importance of active listening, which is really, really hard work. Active listening is hard work. It demonstrates to the person you're communicating with that you respect them. You're able to develop relationships and increase your knowledge. You learn more about them, like we talked about, getting proximate. You can also brainstorm and generate new ideas that you never thought about. And active listening helps build loyalty. Think about what I just said about staff retention. If you have a supervisor that's actively listening to you and you're actively listening to them, you're probably going to want to stay with that supervisor. So here are some traits of active listeners. They spend more time listening than talking. They don't finish other people's sentences. They don't answer questions with questions. They're aware of their biases. We all have them, but we need to control them. They don't daydream or become preoccupied with their own thoughts when other people talk, and they let the other people speak. They don't dominate the conversation. So there's a couple of examples of this that we give out. We give a homework assignment to people and ask them to write down which of these things they do over a 1-week period. One of these things is the nodder, and I'm sure some of you are guilty of this. I know I'm guilty of it. You're listening to another person and you're nodding as they're talking, nodding, 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 looking like you're listening, but you're not actually listening. And then they ask you a question and you have no idea what they said, right? So that's an example of not active listening. Or you could be the rebuttal maker, the person that as the other person is listening, you're thinking about how are you going to rebut what they just said? Yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. So you're having like an argument in your head and you're not really listening to what the other person is saying. And finally, there's my favorite one called the happy hooker, which is when you're listening to another person tell a story, you're thinking about a story similar that happened to you, and you're saying, oh, yeah, well, listen to what happened to me, instead of actually demonstrating respect for that other person and listening to what happened to them. So like I said, active listening is hard work. It's not easy, but it is rewarding. And you can identify you're effective or not so effective based on some of those examples I just gave you by paying attention to how often you do the things we just discussed, like not even looking up at people when they're talking to you. And then make a conscious effort to continue the positive habits or change those negative habits. So let's summarize what we've learned so far. We can ask people how we can help just by asking them and finding out what they need and want. If we can't help, we can use the no wrong door approach by finding someone or someplace who can help them, and we can offer alternatives. And if they have to wait for an appointment or be seen at another organization, how would you handle it? You could be open and transparent. Remember, those are the best policies. For example, your wait time will be this long. We're going to refer you to the Mental Health Center for services. I'm going to make a call so that they know that you're coming, and I'll follow up with them and with you to make sure you were seen and received the services that you needed. I know it's hard work, but it's really important. And I know that you guys work with individuals with very different and challenging complex needs. And all of these things need to be taken into consideration when working with these individuals, and then some. Again, it's hard work, but it's also very rewarding. As an example, we work with a homeless shelter in Homestead, near Homestead Air Force Base. And they have an employment program where they prepare individuals for interviews, resume writing, and so on. They also have a warehouse where they have professional clothing, such as suits, ties, shoes, etc. A job coach brought one of their clients over to the warehouse for a suit and tie as well as shoes. And they needed the head of security, a man of very few words, to open the warehouse for them. After the gentleman put on his suit and tie and shoes and was walking out, the head of security called the individual by name, told him he looked sharp. He told him to stand up straight and be himself at that interview. And then he said, now go shave your beard. That individual went back to the shelter, shaved his beard, and got the job. And he was still employed by that organization when that story was told to us. You never know the impact you may have on another human being. So people with complex needs, they're no different than us. Their challenges may be greater, but they still want to be accepted and heard. They don't want to be yelled at or bullied, and they want to be understood from their perspective. Again, be aware of your biases and don't let them interfere with your work. So a quick reminder of what Brian Stevenson said, and another plug for his book, get proximate, get to know people. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. Help them change their narrative. Use a strengths-based approach. Find out what they're passionate about, like those older adults I talked about, what they're satisfied or dissatisfied with, and their level of motivation. Provide hope. This is just so important. I can't say it enough. And finally, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Again, get the book, read the book, take it out of the library. If you can't get it, watch his TED Talk. I promise it's not going to be a waste of your time. So in summary, this is what Dr. Minkoff says. People with behavioral health conditions and complex behavioral health conditions they all need what we all need and what we want. We want welcoming and access to services, hope for a happy life, integrated relationships across systems, being an empowered partner in their treatment relationship, being listened to, continuity and flexibility, not having to repeat their story over and over to multiple people, using strengths-based learning and the development of skills and natural support. And finally, and this is my favorite one, is that we need to celebrate small steps of success with big rounds of applause. If you could see me now, you could see I'm making a big circle and clapping my hands for big rounds of applause. How motivated do you think people feel when we celebrate their accomplishments, no matter how small, instead of criticizing their missteps? This is one of my little pet peeves I have about outcomes, and I know all of you have to collect outcomes to report, but if I'm a person who's been drinking every day for the last 15 years, and I have one day clean and sober, is that an accomplishment for me? I would venture to say yes. Is that something that we measure and report as an outcome? I would venture to say no. I know we have these magic numbers of 30 days clean, 30 days employment, 30 days living in stable housing, but we can still, even though we have to report those things, we can still celebrate those small steps of success with big rounds of applause. Because if you have kids, you know that you can also motivate them by doing the same thing. So the golden rule says, everybody knows what the golden rule is, treat people the way you want to be treated. The platinum rule says, treat people the way they want to be treated, and they will remember how you made them feel. So Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. You never know, like that security guard, if you're going to be the person who will make a difference in their lives. So in conclusion, I want to thank you all for this opportunity. I want you to go out and change the world, one person, one organization, one community at a time. Thank you all for sharing your time with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to take some questions if you have. Diane, I don't know if you got any questions while people were...
I have a question. What types of training do you recommend for case managers or clinicians who work with adolescents or young adults?
Okay, great question. And I didn't talk about this in this presentation, but it's very similar to the co-occurring principles that Dr. Minkoff promulgated, very similar to the Ross principles that I talked about. I'm a little bit biased because, again, we do training in this area, but I highly recommend wraparound case management as a model for youth and young adults. And I also recommend the TIP model that was also developed at the University of South Florida by Rusty Clark, and that's for transition age young adults, people who are transitioning into adulthood. Hope that answers that question.
What are some ways to collaborate with other organizations?
Another good question. This is probably one of those most difficult things to do, especially if you don't get out into the field. When I say the field, that means to meetings that often. But you can get to know other people that work in those other cross-sector collaboration organizations. So, for example, you can get to know people in the child welfare system. You can get to know people in the criminal justice system. You can attend meetings in the community. But even if you don't attend meetings, you can call those other folks on the phone and say, you know, I'd like to get together just to learn more about what you do so that you can learn more about what we do. We've actually set up cross-system and cross-sector collaboration meetings where we invite representatives from those different organizations to come together. Our leadership class is actually an example of that, where people, we've had people in our leadership class and other of these meetings come in and say, oh my God, it's so nice to meet you. I've referred to you for so long, or I've talked to you on the phone, but I've never actually gotten to meet you. And then they get to meet the other person and learn more about them. So the more you can participate in those kinds of activities, the better.
One more question. You mentioned happiness is 40% in your control. I can agree with that statement. I'd like to know, where did that information come from?
Okay, I can actually send you that so we can add it to the resource list. I'll just quickly tell you, because we only have a couple of minutes, but the reason Julie and I became interested in positive psychology, and we've actually attended the International Conference on Positive Psychology, is because my mom passed away in 2012, and I was kind of in a funk, and Julie was in a funk, and we went to the bookstore, and so we were looking at like self-help books, and everything there was about ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression. It was just so negative. We found one book on happiness. That's not the one I'm going to recommend. But then we started doing a lot more research. Now, this was a long time ago. If you go to the bookstore now or to the library, you're going to find tons of books on happiness because everybody is writing them. So the book that I'm referring to, where this data comes from, is written by, and I'm going to screw up her last name, but her name is Sonia Liborowski. I hope I said that correctly. But I'll send you the link to that book so you can also see it. But the field of positive psychology was developed by, if any of you have taken psychology classes, Dr. Martin Seligman. And he's the one who actually came up with learned helplessness, which involved putting a frog in a pot of water, and then the frog tried to jump out but couldn't get out. And then as they turned up the heat and the boiling water started, the frog just learned that he couldn't get out of there, and he just died in the pot. And so he talked about learned helplessness and how negative that is, and just how we do those kinds of things. Then one day he was gardening in his garden with his 5-year-old daughter, and he was pulling weeds, and of course, you know how 5-year-old little girls are. As he's pulling the weeds, she's picking them up and she's throwing them all over the place. And he said to her, he got mad at her, and she said to him with her hand on her hip, "Daddy." And he looked up at her and he said, "Yeah." And she said, "Remember when I turned 5 and you told me I was 5 and I could stop whining?" He said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, if I could stop whining and I learned how to stop whining, you could learn how to stop being so grumpy." And that's actually how the field of positive psychology was born. It was born before then, but he really took it into the mainstream through the American Psychological Association. He was president at the time. And there's just so much research in this area that, yes, I truly believe, and it helped me tremendously to get out of that funk when my mom passed away, that you can change. I meditate every morning, I journal, I exercise, I still do all of those things. And it definitely helps to change your perspective. So I hope that answered your question, and I'll send the link.
Thank you, Marci. There's actually one more question that populated, and I think it's a good one, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
As a probation officer, using motivational interviewing is great. Would you recommend using the ROSC in case management, in parentheses, overall, for probationers when working with those challenged by addiction and or co-occurring disorder within the criminal justice system?
100%. The ROSC principles, the CCISC principles that I talked about, Dr. Minkoff's principles, the wraparound principles, they can be used in any setting, in any organization. They're a framework, and it's really just, a philosophy and principles that we just have to keep in the back of our mind. It's talking about individualized treatment. It's talking about peer support. It's talking about all the things that we should be doing. Motivational interviewing is more of a technique, a how-to. You know, it's kind of like a cookbook. You get trained in it just like you get trained in trauma-focused therapy. But the principles of ROS, the principles of wraparound, the principles of co-occurring, that you can integrate anywhere. I highly recommend that. Yes, 100%. And I would recommend that you attend some of those trainings if you can in the community. DCF offers those trainings.
Thank you, Marci, for your time, for your resources, and your expertise here today. So we're going to conclude today's webinar. Your browser will take you to an evaluation on FADA's new website. If you want to receive CE credits or a statement of credit for this event, please complete the evaluation. You will be prompted to register or sign in to complete the evaluation. You can register as a visitor at no cost. For CEs to be reported to CE broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. After you register or sign in, you will be directed onward to the evaluation. You may consider using the same email address when you register for webinars through our WebEx link and when you set up your profile in FADA's system. This helps connect your attendance and your profile. You will get a second opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today in about 30 minutes. The sender will be Messenger at WebEx. Evaluation will close at midnight on Thursday, February 21st. We do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be generated as a journal entry within your profile. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. We'd also like to recognize and thank especially the Florida Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health for funding today's education. Have a great rest of your day, and please hold for the evaluation.